The winter of 1887 came down hard on Elkhorn Ridge, a hodge-gravel outpost pressed between two hills and a river that only moved when it thawed. Snow blanketed the land for weeks, curling around fences, burying wagon ruts, and seeping into the walls of cabins already patched with flour sacks and newspaper. Trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches black and brittle under the weight of ice. The land was still, but it was peaceful. It was the kind of silence that made a person feel watched. On the outskirts of town, where the wind had more room to breathe, a small clapboard house sagged against the hillside. Its chimney coughed a sickly thread of smoke that barely warmed the rooms inside. This was where Eliza Boone sat, hands raw from trying to light a fire with damp wood, her children huddled beneath quilts, whimpering, 5 of them, the oldest barely 9, the youngest still at her breast. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The last of the flour had gone into a pan of biscuits that morning, and she had fed them to the children without touching one herself. Her bones ached. Her milk had nearly dried. Her husband Samuel had died the spring before from a tree fall cut clean and half out past the ridge, his blood soaking into the bark. Since then, Eliza had done everything she could think of to hold on. Sewing for ranch wives, cleaning for the widow Parsons, even scraping lichen off the trees and boiling it for broth when things got lean. But nothing was enough, and now the storms had cut them off from town. Snow pressed against the windows like a white fist. The baby whimpered against her chest. Eliza rocked her gently, trying not to let her own shivering wake the child. The others lay in a nest of blankets on the floor, too cold to cry aloud, their noses red, fingers pale. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a worn rag, wiping soot from the iron stove. The motion was pointless. There was no more wood to burn, not really. She had broken up the last of the table legs that morning. Her wedding dress had been cut into strips and stuffed into cracks in the walls weeks ago. Samuel's boots had been burned the night before. She remembered holding them over the flame, leather hissing, and whispering him sorry. Out beyond the hill, the wind shifted. It moaned low through the trees. She had heard people say the land could speak if you were quiet enough. She didn't believe that anymore. The land didn't speak. It only took. The baby stirred, then let out a weak, thin cry. Eliza kissed her forehead, tasting salt and dirt. Her lips were cracked. Her body sagged with the weight of hunger and grief. And the old question returned, like it did every night now, what if I don't wake up? A sound, not wind, blood ice cracking. A horse. She froze. The children stirred slightly. A shape moved past the window, a dark blot against the white. Boots crunched against the snow. Eliza didn't have the strength to stand, so she just watched the door. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but not from fear, from something more strange, a kind of disbelief. No. 3 quick raps. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. The door opened slow, creaking inward. A man stood there, tall and draped in a weathered duster. His face was shadowed under a wide hat, beard dusted with snow. He held something in his hands. A sack. The warm smell hit her, first bread, maybe, or meat, something alive with heat. The cowboy looked around the room and saw what was left of the Boone family. His eyes moved slowly. Not sure, just quiet, like he was learning the story by reading the walls. He said, "Didn't mean to scare you." Eliza swallowed. Her voice came out rough. "You didn't." He stepped in and shut the door behind him. "Name's Jonah." He set the sack down near the stove. "Your boy Micah flagged me down up the road. Said you were cold. That right?" Eliza's gaze flicked to her eldest, who lay half asleep on the floor. She didn't remember him leaving. Maybe H.E. had gone out looking for wood and kept walking. Maybe H.E.D. done what she no longer had the will to. She nodded slowly. Jonah knelt beside the stove, opened the sack. He pulled out 2 small bundles wrapped in cloth, still steaming. One was cornbread, the other smoked pork. He didn't look at her while he worked. "I brought some back from the ridge. I ain't much, but it'll hold you tonight." Eliza didn't cry. Her face didn't move, but her hands did, reaching slowly for the bundle like she was touching a miracle she didn't believe in. Jonah didn't speak again. He just fed the fire with wood from his pack and sat on the floor near the children, where the heat could reach them. Outside, the wind howled like a beast retreating into the trees. Inside, the children stopped crying. The fire caught with a dry hiss. Jonah coaxed it like it was something half while adding pieces slow, careful, feeding warmth back into the room like a man might feed a bird from his palm. The scent of wood smoke and pork filled the cabin, waking the children. Little Ruthie stirred first, blinking up at the stranger, then curling closer to her brother. Micah sat up straighter, stiff with worry, but didn't speak. Eliza moved her back against the wall and watched. The children ate in silence, fingers clumsy from cold. No one rushed. They chewed slow, reverent, like the food might vanish if they were careless. Jonah didn't eat. He passed the cornbread around, then the meat, then pulled his coat tighter and settled near the fire, his eyes watching the flames instead of the people. The quiet was not heavy. It was the kind that felt turned. When the youngest, Anna, finally fell asleep with crumbs on her chin, Eliza cleared her throat. "You come from Mick Colock's ranch." Jonah gave a small nod. "I ride fence for him. Mostly East Range, near the old cedar breaks." Eliza glanced down at her hands. They looked like someone else's, now chapped, rayed, worn to the bone. Her wedding ring had slipped off sometime in October when the cold made her fingers shrink. She hadn't bothered to look for it. "That's 3 hours by horse," she said quietly. "Closer to if you cut the dry rake. You didn't have to come." "No," Jonah said. "Didn't." Something in her chest tightened. She tried not to let it show. He looked at her for the first time since coming in. His face was lined, but not old. Not yet. His skin was wind-chapped and brown from sun. His beard was neat but rough, like a man used to trimming with a hunting knife. His eyes were pale gray, like river eyes. "You got someone checking in on you?" he asked. She shook her head. "Had a neighbor. Miss Parsons. She fell sick before Christmas. They took her down to Julesburg for treatment. I ain't seen anyone since." Jonah asked, brow twitched faintly, almost a frown. "And the preacher?" "Yes, got a new baby. Dad come out this far." Jonah didn't answer right away. Just looked around the room again, taking in the sagging shelves, the cracked windows stuffed with cloth, the broken chair beside the door. "You're hanging on," he said. "Not as praise, just fact." Eliza gave a bitter laugh, though no sound came with it. "Barely." Jonah stirred, stood, and moved toward the woodpile by the door. He began stacking what little was left, scraps of plank, knotty roots, broken broom handles. When he spoke again, it was low. "I had a sister once. Looked after me when our mama passed. Pa lost much use, so it fell on her. She held on too long. Took sick and died before she turned 21. Buried her out by the San Pedro crossing." Eliza studied him, unsure why he told her that. "You the youngest?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just the one who made it." The wind shifted again outside. Not as sharp now. The worst of the storm was lifting, but cold still owned the night, and Eliza could feel it press against the seams of the house, testing it, testing her. She let her head fall back against the wall and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't scare her. The children were breathing softly. The fire crackled. And across from her, a stranger with his back to the door kept watch like it was his job. Later, after they'd all gone quiet, Jonah stepped outside to tend his horse. Eliza followed him with her eyes but didn't get up. Her legs didn't work the same anymore. Not after so many nights without food or rest. She stared into the fire and remembered. Samuel had been a good man. Not fast, not strong, not sharp, but steady. The kind that kept going even when he was beat. He loved the land more than he understood it. Kept saying the seasons would turn, that things would ease up. He'd gone out in April to fell a birch near the creek. It was early yet, and snow still clung to the north slope. The trunk caught him wrong, pinned him to the earth. By the time Eliza reached him, he was already fading. Ched knelt in the mud and held his hand as the light left him. He tried to say something. She never caught the words. After that, she didn't cry. Not once. Not even when the neighbors brought casseroles and spoke softly, like grief was something you needed quiet to catch. She didn't cry because she didn't have time. The boys needed boots. The baby had colic. The house leaned more every year, and there were fence posts to mend. The hens stopped laying by November, and the well froze in December, and her milk started thinning in January. You hold on. That's all. You just hold. But tonight, for the first time, she felt the ache rise up from inside. Not from hunger, not from cold, from being seen. A cowboy had come through a snowstorm to sit by her fire and feed her children. It didn't make her strong again. It didn't fix what was broken, but it let her breathe. And for now, that was enough. Subscribe and keep walking into the unknown. The morning came slow and pale, like it was afraid to open its eyes. Light sifted through the threadbare curtains and cast long bars across the floor, catching on the children's tangled hair and the stove's warm belly. The fire still glowed. Jonah had risen twice in the night to tend it, quiet as a ghost. Eliza hadn't slept. Not really. She had dozed sitting up, arms wrapped around little Anna, her head nodding forward and jerking back again, over and over like a prayer she didn't know she was saying. Jonah stood at the doorway now, holding a steaming tin mug. The smell of coffee filled the room, not bitter or thin like she was used to, but full, real. He offered her the cup. She took it with both hands, sick. The heat startled her, and she nearly wept. "I'll ride back before noon," he said. "Storms pass, but the creek SLL's well once it warms. Best cross while it still froze." She nodded, looking at her children, still asleep on the floor. They looked softer in daylight, less like little ghosts. "Micah told me you used to bake pies for the general store," Jonah said, without prompting. "Said your peach cobbler could stop a man's heart." Eliza let out a breath of something close to a laugh. "I did. Before everything else." He gave a small smile. "Well, if I bring you sugar and flour next week, you think you might remember how?" She glanced up at him. "You planning to come back?" "Only if the pie's as good as he says." He sipped his own coffee then, standing by the door, Boothiel tapping a slow rhythm against the wood. She didn't know what to make of him. He was like the ranch hand she'd known before. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was to fill space. He didn't tell her she was brave or strong or say how sorry he was for her loss. He didn't make any promises. But when he saw the cracked beam above the hearth, he said, "I can bring a post from the McCulloch lot. Shore this up." And when he noticed Micah's coat to shorten the arms, he said, "Got an old one that might fit, if I patch the sleeve." He didn't speak of charity. He spoke like a man making an agreement. Eliza sat still, her coffee cooling in her hands. "I don't want to owe anyone," she said quietly. "You don't." She studied him, trying to find the catch. But he was already looking at the trail outside, scanning the horizon like he was used to reading it. "There's folks in town talk," she said, "about people like me, about women who take help from men who aren't their kin." Jonah didn't look at her, just nodded once. Let him talk. Something about the way he said it calm, not defiant, settled the breath in her chest. He stepped out into the snow and walked toward his horse. Eliza watched through the window as he checked the cinch and patted the animal's side. It was a sturdy paint, legs flecked with frost, breath clouding in the cold air. She moved to the doorway and pulled her shawl tight. "You've got people?" she asked, though she didn't know why. Jonah hesitated, then shook his head. "Not anymore." He swung into the saddle. "You'll be back by Friday, weather willing. You don't have to." He looked at her long enough that she felt the weight of it. "Maybe not." He clicked his tongue and turned the horse toward the ridge. Eliza stood in the doorway long after he disappeared, the wind lifting her hair, her feet bare on the cold wood. She didn't go inside right away. She stood there listening to the snow melt in slow, steady drips from the eaves. The world was still hard, still quiet, still waiting to take. But for the first time since spring, she felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the kind of silence she could live with. The snow thawed quick that week. By Thursday, the ice along the creek had cracked into jagged plates, the kind that sliced boots and swallowed carts. The mud came next, slick, thick, and stubborn as sin. The trail from McCulloch's ranch turned into a ribbon of brown glue, but Jonah came anyway, just like he said he would. He showed up with a sack slung across his saddle and 2 planks of good pine strapped behind. Micah spotted him first, ran to the edge of the yard with his coat flapping open, face red with cold and something brighter. Eliza stood in the doorway again, arms crossed, wary but waiting. "I brought what I promised," Jonah said, setting the sack down with a dull thud. "Sugar, flour, lard, beans, and a coat." He handed it to Micah, who tried not to look too grateful. Boys at that age wore proud like their fathers, but Jonah didn't make a fuss, just nodded like it was a fair trade. "Got some pipe nails, too," he added, "for the roof patch." Eliza stepped aside without a word, letting him in. It had been 5 days, but it felt longer. Something about his presence brought the room back into shape. He didn't fill it, he just settled into it, like HED belonged a while. That afternoon they worked side by side. Jonah set the new beam over the hearth, driving wedges under it with slow, precise blows. Eliza held the frame steady, her hands braced on the rough wood. When the old chair gave out under his weight, she smiled without meaning to. He smirked back, dust on his shoulders. "You always this handy?" she asked. He shrugged. "A man's got to know how to keep things from falling." They didn't talk much more than that, but when the hammering stopped and the room held still again, something different hung in the air, something gentler than silence. That evening she baked. The pie came out ragged at the edges, crust torn from the lack of butter, but the smell filled the cabin like summer. Peaches from the last jar she'd saved shed meant to keep it for a birthday or maybe Easter. Instead, she used it now without regret. Jonah ate slowly, careful, as if he knew what it had cost her. When he finished, he set his fork down and said he was right. Micah said it might stop a man's heart. I think it near did." That night, he didn't stay. But before he left, he walked with her to the edge of the woods, where the wind snapped against the trees like a switch. "Snow's likely done," he said, eyeing the sky. "Maybe," she said, "but the cold don't leave just 'cause the snow melts." He didn't argue, just stood there a minute, looking at the cabin behind her. The window glowed soft with firelight. Inside, her children moved like shadows on the wall. "Your husband'd teach you how to keep a place running like that." She shook her head. "He tried, but it wasn't until he was gone I really learned it." He looked down, scuffed his boot in the dirt. "My ma used to say hard things have a way of showing you who you are." Eliza rubbed her arms, the cold seeping through the wall. "And who are you?" He looked up, eyes catching the last light of day, still figuring that out. The next week, he came back with fence wire. The week after, with a sack of potatoes and a rusted lantern HED repaired. He started staying later, sometimes through supper, sometimes past dark. The children began asking when HED be back before HED even left. Eliza didn't ask questions. She didn't push or pry, but she watched. She saw how he fixed the latch on the door without being asked, how he taught Micah to split wood without snapping the grain, how he paused when little Ruthie spilled water, let her try again instead of doing it for her. He never talked about his past, not really. But once, when the baby fell asleep on his shoulder, he whispered, "My brother had a girl like this. She'd scream if you put her down." Drove him mad, but he loved her anyway. And Eliza, her voice slow, said, "You ever see her still?" Jonah had stared into the fire and said no. I ain't nobody left. There was no pity in it, just truth. They didn't speak after that, but something shifted. Not fast, not loud. Like the way snow melts under sunlight, quiet, patient, inevitable. Trouble didn't come all at once. It came the way it always did out there on a clear morning when the sky looked honest. Eliza was hanging damp clothes near the stove when she heard the horse. Not Jonah's. This one moved sharp, impatient. She felt it before she saw it, a tightening low in her belly. The man who dismounted wore a town coat too fine for the mud, collar turned up like he was offended by the cold. His boots were polished, not meant for walking. He didn't knock. He stepped inside like the place belonged to him. "Eliza Boone," he said, smiling thin. "You look thinner." Her spine stiffened. "What do you want, Mr. Harlan?" Edgar Harlan had been Samuel's cousin by marriage. He owned land closer to town and spoke often of responsibility and order. Hed come calling twice after the funeral, offering help that sounded too much like ownership. Shed turned him away both times. "I hear you've been entertaining a man," he said, glancing around. A ranch hand. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her voice level. "Yes, a friend." Highland snorted. "Friendship looks different when there's 5 hungry mouths." She crossed her arms. "Say what you came to say." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You can't manage this place. Folks are talking. A woman alone, accepting favors. It ain't right. And you're here to fix it?" "I'm here to offer a solution." His eyes flicked to the children peeking from the doorway. "You marry me, I take over the property, keep the children fed. Or I petition the county. They'll place the younger ones with families who can provide." The words landed like stones. "You wouldn't," she said. Harlan smiled again, thin and patient. "I would. And I will. Think on it." He tipped his hat and left, boots clean as when he came. Eliza stood there long after the sound of his horse faded. Her hands shook. She pressed them flat against the table until they stilled. That evening Jonah arrived with a sack of seed potatoes and a coil of rope. He took one look at her face and set everything down. "What happened?" She told him. All of it. The words came out clipped, controlled. She did not cry. Jonah listened without interruption. When she finished, he stared at the floor, jaw working. "I should have known," he said finally. "Men like that don't let go easy." She hugged herself. "I don't want to marry him, and I won't give my children away." "You won't," Jonah said. But there was something uncertain in his voice now. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. "This is my fault," she said suddenly. "I shouldn't have let you come around so much. Shouldn't have leaned." Jonah's head snapped up. "Don't. If I hadn't." "Eliza." His voice was low, firm. "You didn't do anything wrong. But it gives him cause. It gives him an excuse. There's a difference." He paced the room once, then stopped. "I could leave," he said. "If that's what you need. Might quiet the talk." The words hit her harder than Harlan's threat. She looked at him then, really looked. At the man who fixed what was breaking, who held her baby like it mattered, who never once asked for more than what she gave freely. And she saw something else. Fear. Not for himself, but for what his staying might cost her. "I don't want you to go," she said, the truth breaking loose before she could stop it. "Jonas, well, I don't want to stay if it puts you at risk." They stood there, the space between them filled with everything unsaid. That night, Jonas slept in the barn. Eliza lay awake, listening to the children breathe, to the wind moving through the eave. She thought of Samuel, of promises made out of love and broken by chance. She thought of Harlan's smile, of county men with papers and rules. And she thought of Jonah choosing distance because it might protect her. By morning she knew what she had to do. When Jonah came inside for coffee, she met his eyes and said, "I won't be managed." By him, or by fear. He nodded slowly. "Then we face it, together." Outside, the ground was soft with thaw. Mud clung to boots. The land shifted restless. So did they. The hearing was set for a Tuesday. Harlan had sent word to the county magistrate, a weary old man named Clem Wiggins, who owed him more favors than any one man should. Eliza was given 3 days' notice. Just enough time to be afraid, not enough to prepare. Jonah offered to ride with her into town. She shook her head at first, then nodded. They left at dawn, Micah watching the younger ones with a solemn, grown look on his face. Eliza wore her only clean dress and draped her hair in a faded scarf. She didn't speak much on the way in, neither did Jonah. But when the wheels caught in a rut, he climbed down and pushed without a word, mud up to his knees. The courtroom wasn't much, just a back room of the town hall, with floors warped by flood and heat. Harlan was already inside when they arrived, sitting straight in his black coat, hands folded like a preacher. Eliza stood before the table, hands steady, eyes clearer than she thought they'd be. She answered questions about the farm, the children, her finances. She didn't flinch when they asked about Jonah. "H.E.S. a friend," she said. "H.E.S. helped when no one else would. But I never asked for more than kindness." Wiggins looked up from his papers. "And what about the children's welfare? If this situation continues?" "I am their welfare," she said. "Am what?" They've got. The room was still. Jonah stepped forward then, uninvited. If it's a matter of provision, he said, voice firm, I've spoken with McCullough. HES agreed to lease Eliza a teemed parcel of grazing land. She can run it under her own name. He'll oversee the fence work. She'll be able to bring in her own yield by fall. Harlan stood. That's illegal. It's not, Wiggins interrupted, fingers twitching at the stack of notes. She'd be leasing, not owning. The arrangement's legal. Harlan looked like someone had taken his teeth. You're just going to let this slide? A widow living with some ranch hand. Him not living with him, Eliza said, calm. But I might ask him to build a house nearby. If HES willing. Jonah looked at her then. His face didn't change, but his hand twitched at his side, like he wasn't used to feeling hope rise so fast. The magistrate made his ruling quiet and quick. The children would remain in Eliza's care. The county would make no further motion. Outside, the sun was bright, the air holding that first trace of warmth that hinted at spring. Eliza stood on the steps, her hands shaking now that it was over. Jonah came to her side. You did it. No, she said. We did. They walked back to the wagon slow. No rush. The kind of pace people use when something heavy has been lifted and they're not sure what comes next. Halfway down the road, Eliza said, you really spoke to McCullough. I did. And you meant it. About helping build that house. I did. She looked at him, long and steady. I don't want to owe you. You won't, he said, then added softer, but I hope you'll choose to keep me anyway. Her breath caught. She nodded once. Not a big gesture. Not dramatic. Just real. By the time they got back, the wind had calmed. Micah was mending a coop door, Ruthie tending to the fire. The house looked the same but different, like it had a root now, like it wasn't going anywhere. Later that night, Jonah stayed for supper. He sat with the children, let in a drool biscuit crumbs on his shirt, and laughed when she tugged his beard. After the dishes were done, Eliza stepped outside. Jonah followed. She reached into her apron and pulled something out. A bent brass ring. Her wedding band. Found in the dirt weeks ago after the last thaw. I don't wear it any more, she said, pressing it into his hand. But I thought maybe something else. He understood. He didn't kiss her then. Just held her hand and said, well, make it work. I know, she said. And she did. Spring came in fits, cold one day, soft the next. The ground turned pliable, the creeks ran loud, and the cottonwoods near the edge of the pasture swelled with buds that hadn't opened in years. The land wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It just kept going, and so did they. Jonah moved his things into the barn by April, not because anyone said he had to, but because he wanted to be near, and Eliza wasn't ready for more than that. He came in for supper, helped Mike and Jonah Jr. string fence across the back field, taught Ruthie how to tie proper knots, the kind that held even when the wind pulled hard. Every evening H.E.D. tipped his hat to Eliza as he crossed the yard, and every morning she'd find some small thing fixed, a hinge repaired, a tool cleaned, seeds sorted by hand. He brought her a cedar box one night, carved smooth and plain. What's this? She asked. A place for your ring, he said, until you decide what comes next. She kept it on the shelf above the stove, where she could see it but not touch it too fast. Some mornings she'd catch herself looking at it too long. Some nights she'd forget it was there, and then wake remembering. By May, the leased land was ready. Eliza planted potatoes with her sleeves rolled up, her arms covered in dirt to the elbows. She didn't ask Jonah to help, but he did anyway, one row over. Neither of them talking, both sweating in the sun. It wasn't a big field, but it was hers. Word got around. Folks in town who had looked past her now looked her in the eye. Some asked for pies again. Some brought tools they didn't need. None of them spoke about Harlan. H.E.D. left for Cheyenne after the hearing, or so they said. No one missed him. In June, Jonah brought her a small gold chain H.E.D. found in an old cigar box. Nothing fancy, he said, but it don't belong in a drawer anymore. She took it with a nod and wore it around her neck. It caught the light when she moved. By July, the roof no longer leaked. The pantry held jars of green beans, pickled carrots, and early raspberries. The baby had learned to walk, toddling after Jonah like he was some kind of gentle giant. Eliza watched them once through the window. Jonah crouched in the dirt, the baby offering him a stick like it was treasure. That night, she stepped outside and said, "I'm ready." He didn't ask what for. They were married under the cottonwoods, with the children gathered close in the wind combing the grass behind them. There was no preacher, no ring exchange, just hands held and words spoken clear. Afterward, Eliza placed her old wedding band in the cedar box and closed the lid. A new chapter had begun, and she didn't need to erase the last one to believe in this one. They built a room onto the back of the house by August. Jonah moved in full. His saddle stayed near the door, his boots beside hers. He never said he loved her out loud. He didn't need to. It was in the way he lit the fire before she woke, the way he leaned close when she was tired, the way he made the children laugh like they were whole again. And Eliza, who had once thought herself finished, began again. One night, as summer broke open above them in a streak of orange and violet sky, she took his hand and pressed it to her belly. "Blake," she said. He looked at her, blinking once, then smiled. They didn't speak after that, just stood together in the yard, listening to the wind move through the leaves like it was carrying something sacred. The land would still be hard, the work unending, but the house was warm now and full, the fire steady, the walls held. And when the first frost came again, the children would not cry alone. Subscribe, and don't let the trail go cold.